In the darkest corners of human history, there are names that echo not for heroism or greatness, but for the unspeakable horrors they unleashed. These individuals wore the masks of normalcy, charming, quiet, even friendly, while hiding monstrous urges beneath their skin. They stalked the shadows of cities and countryside alike, leaving behind trails of blood, terror, and broken lives. Some killed for pleasure, others for power, compulsion, or madness. Their crimes defied comprehension. Their evil felt almost inhuman. This is not a list for the faint of heart. Here are the top 5 most notorious serial killers in history, men whose names have become synonymous with fear, cruelty, and death. Their legacies are carved into the annals of true crime, their stories as horrifying as any nightmare, and all of them true. At first glance, Ted Bundy didn't look like a killer. With his clean-cut appearance, confident charm, and law student background, he seemed more like a politician in the making than a predator. But behind the handsome smile lurked one of the most cold-blooded killers in American history. Active primarily during the 1970s, Bundy is confirmed to have murdered at least 20 women, though investigators believe the true number could be 30 or more. His victims were often young, attractive women, many of whom were lured to their deaths by Bundy's deceptive tactics. He would feign a broken arm or impersonate a police officer, then strike once his prey was vulnerable. Bundy's killing spree spanned several U.S. states, including Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. He was a master manipulator, able to escape capture twice, once from a courthouse and again from a prison. His final rampage in Florida resulted in the brutal attack and murder of 2 sorority sisters at Florida State University, an act so savage it shocked even seasoned investigators. In a chilling twist, Bundy served as his own attorney during his trial, often cross-examining witnesses and manipulating the courtroom. Even as overwhelming evidence mounted, he maintained his innocence for years. He was finally convicted and executed in the electric chair on January 24, 1989. Outside the prison, crowds cheered and held signs that read "Burn Bundy, burn." What makes Bundy particularly terrifying is how ordinary he seemed. He shattered the stereotype of what evil looks like. Ted Bundy didn't just kill, he deceived, seduced, and destroyed with calculated cruelty. His legacy lives on, not just in true crime lore, but in the unsettling reminder that the face of a monster can look perfectly normal. In the crumbling Soviet Union of the late 20th century, a monster stalked the shadows, one whose crimes were so horrific they were nearly beyond belief. Andrei Chikatilo, later known as the Butcher of Rostov, became one of Russia's most feared serial killers, responsible for a trail of mutilated bodies stretching over a decade. Between 1978 and 1990, Chikatilo raped, mutilated, and murdered at least 52 women and children across southern Russia and Ukraine. His victims were often drifters, runaways, or schoolchildren lured to forests, bus stops, or abandoned buildings. There, he unleashed unspeakable violence, stabbing, biting, gouging out eyes, and, in many cases, consuming parts of the bodies. Chikatilo suffered from impotence, and his sexual satisfaction became grotesquely intertwined with murder. Each kill was a release, and as time passed, his attacks grew more frenzied. The brutality of his crimes left even hardened Soviet investigators shaken. For years, the Soviet government refused to publicly acknowledge a serial killer, believing it to be a Western phenomenon. This denial allowed Chikatilo to continue unchecked. Several innocent men were arrested, some even executed, while the real killer remained free. In 1990, after a decade-long reign of terror, Chikatilo was finally arrested near a train station after acting suspiciously around children. A search of his belongings and forensic evidence linked him to the murders. He eventually confessed in disturbing detail to 56 murders, speaking of them with eerie detachment. At his trial, Chikatilo was placed in a cage for his own protection from enraged victims' families. He was convicted and executed by a single gunshot to the head in 1994. Andrei Chikatilo was not just a murderer, he was a symbol of a society in denial, of hidden horrors behind gray concrete walls, and of what happens when monsters are allowed to hide in plain sight. Behind the door of apartment 213 on North 25th Street in Milwaukee, Jeffrey Dahmer was hiding a nightmare so gruesome it defied imagination. When police entered his home on July 22, 1991, they uncovered a scene of pure horror: severed heads in the refrigerator, human hearts in the freezer, and photographs of dismembered bodies, evidence of a killing spree that shocked the world. Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys between 1978 and 1991, most of whom were Black, Latino, or Southeast Asian. His method was horrifyingly systematic. He would lure victims to his apartment with offers of money or companionship, drug them, and then strangle them. What followed was even darker acts of necrophilia, dismemberment, and cannibalism. Dahmer's crimes went unnoticed for years, largely due to his soft-spoken, unassuming nature. He lived quietly, held various jobs, and often managed to manipulate or charm his way out of suspicion. In one disturbing instance, police actually returned one of his drugged victims, a 14-year-old boy, to him, believing it was a domestic dispute between two lovers. What made Dahmer uniquely terrifying wasn't just the body count, it was the meticulous, cold-blooded way he treated his victims as objects. He attempted to create sex zombies through crude lobotomies and kept trophies, skulls, hearts, and genitalia as mementos. After his arrest, Dahmer confessed in chilling detail to every murder, expressing remorse, but also a chilling detachment. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in 1992, but justice came swiftly in another form. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was beaten to death by a fellow inmate with a metal bar. Dahmer's legacy is one of unimaginable horror. He is a grim reminder that evil can wear the face of a quiet man next door, and that monsters don't always look like monsters. John Wayne Gacy, one of America's most infamous serial killers, was a seemingly ordinary man with a dark, horrific secret. Born in 1942 in Chicago, Gacy was active in his community, known for throwing neighborhood parties and even dressing up as Pogo the Clown to entertain children. Behind this friendly facade, however, was a man capable of unimaginable cruelty. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy sexually assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men and boys. He lured his victims with promises of work or money, often posing as a police officer or authority figure. Most of the murders occurred in his own home, where he buried many of the bodies in the crawl space beneath the house. Gacy's crimes shocked the nation when they came to light in 1978. Police discovered the remains of 29 victims under his house. Others were found in nearby rivers. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death in 1980. After years on death row, Gacy was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. John Wayne Gacy's legacy remains a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary masks, even that of a clown. In the fog-choked streets of Victorian London, a killer emerged from the shadows, silent, ruthless, and forever unknown. Between August and November of 1888, 5 women were savagely murdered in the slums of Whitechapel. The world would come to know their killer by a name that still sends chills more than a century later: Jack the Ripper. His victims, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were all women of the night, struggling to survive in one of London's poorest districts. But what made the Ripper's crimes so horrifying was not just the murder itself, but the brutality. Throats were slit, organs removed, bodies mutilated with surgical precision. Letters, allegedly from the killer, were sent to newspapers and police. One, signed Jack the Ripper, gave the faceless murderer a name and a legend. Another, known as the From Hell letter, came with a human kidney, adding a grotesque layer to the mystery. Despite frantic efforts by Scotland Yard and public hysteria, the Ripper was never caught. Hundreds of suspects were questioned from surgeons to royalty, but no one was ever charged. His sudden disappearance was as mysterious as his arrival, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and gruesome headlines. More than 130 years later, Jack the Ripper's identity remains one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. Books, films, and theories continue to swirl around his shadowy figure, but the truth remains buried in the cobblestones of East London. He was more than a killer, he was a phantom, a specter of fear, and the original serial killer of the modern age. And to this day, the streets of Whitechapel have never quite forgotten him.